Link 2012.
Here from LD26, and the goal of this event today, or let's introduce ourselves first. I'm Tabarak, and my name is Tabarak Abdul Habib. I'm the Executive Director of One Resistance.
And my name is Zorla Vasquez. I'm the Financial Director here at One Resistance.
My name is Devin Dashler, and I'm the Executive Assistant of One Resistance.
My name is Rima Shabaji. I'm the Social Media and Marketing Director of One Resistance.
And also the volunteers that are helping us out and helped us set up. Could you all introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Rishita Tapulkar. I'm Rishita Vasquez.
So the goal today is to know the candidates that have been representing LD26. Most of them have been representing the district for a while now, and they're rerunning for election, as well as to gain exposure to local representatives and begin advocating for yourself. So in One Resistance, we talk about identity a lot, and how your identity plays a role in your political leanings, or what you advocate for or you don't advocate for. And Zorla today will be moderating.
So I'm going to be your moderator today. Hi, I'm Zorla again. This is my first time moderating, so please go easy on me. I'm sorry if anything goes wrong. But thank you so much for everyone for coming, and we hope you enjoy the event. Thank you so much for our candidates for being here. We really appreciate it. Thank you again.
And if you have any questions along the way, raise your hand, and one of us three will come to you to give you a paper to write down your question.
So let's just jump right into this today. I'm going to turn on my mic first, so if you can hear me. Okay. Can you guys hear? Oh, wow. Okay. So, okay, cool. So we have the mic right there for you guys to use. It should be on.
Yeah, she just.
Oh, okay. Cool. So if everybody could move a little bit more towards the front, so it can be a little bit more personal. Yeah, just get everyone to the front.
Yeah, come on in.
Start from this side. About 30 seconds.
Hello everyone, so my name is Isela Blanc. Thank you so much for being here.
My name is Juan Mendez. I'm your state senator from District 26. I have 2 years in the Senate and 4 years in the House.
Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Athena Salman, state representative for District 26. I got elected in 2016, so I'm running for my first re-election. And I'm a proud ASU alumni, having graduated, when's 2011? Is that 8 years ago? 7 years ago. It feels like a long time, but not too long ago.
Awesome. So now that we know a little bit more about our candidates, if it's okay with you guys, we can start right into the questions. Awesome. So first question is, how as a state representative or senator would you approach immigration into the state of Arizona?
So for myself, part of my story is that I came from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico when I was 6.5 years of age, came on a visa, and after 6 months I became undocumented, along with my sisters and my parents. I lived as an undocumented person for close to a decade, but my undocumented story is vastly different from the undocumented stories of today. When I was a kid in 1986, Ronald Reagan, a Republican, along with a bipartisan Congress, decided to pass Reagan amnesty. That was 32 years ago. It just tells you how many steps backwards we've taken. When I was, in essence, in junior high, the idea that immigrants like myself could be embedded into the fabric of this nation, we were seen as benefactors. We were seen as a positive light, and 32 years later to be treated so horribly is really shocking, especially in a state like Arizona that has gone after really Latinos, but people of color. If you look a different hue, Sheriff Joe might stop you. So when I'm asked a question about what I think about immigration, as someone who was given a pathway to citizenship, I know it works. As someone who shares the immigrant story of so many, I've done more good for this nation than I've done bad. So it's something that we need to fight for, and it's something that we continue to talk about, and I think that's why having a former undocumented person representing you in the Arizona State Legislature is really powerful. It's a reminder to my colleagues who are sometimes a little bit biased, some might call it racist. It's a reminder what the American dream is. So of course, I will continue to fight and advocate for our most vulnerable populations at all levels, including our immigrants, our refugees, those living in the shadows as undocumented people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for telling us that story.
The same question?
Same question.
Yeah. I have my own immigration story. I guess I'm a first-generation American. My family is from Mexico. My grandfather actually came over on a work visa to help build a lot of the power infrastructure in Arizona. The Palo Verde power plant and the Four Corners, the generating station up in northern Arizona. And I mean, the same kind of, in the sense that we had a better immigration system in the past, and it was more, I guess, us recognizing that immigration is a reality in this, globalized world. We're going to allow, corporations to be moving money around and doing business in all different kinds of countries. There's going to be the effect of people moving around also. And so I've introduced legislation in Arizona to address, some of the awful atrocities that have been going on in our community that have been doing nothing but making our community less safe. I grew up under the fear of Sheriff Joe and his raids, while my friends and family were just trying to go to school and try to work. And while I was in college, my uncle was deported under Sheriff Joe. And it totally wrecked my whole family apart, and my family still does not feel comfortable engaging with the police when they need to. So I've in the past, I've introduced legislation around instilling more trust in our community, and really just removing a lot of the how police are allowed to ask for people's status when they're victims or witnesses of a crime. Because that just means nobody calls the police in certain communities. And that means we're all less safe, because the police only work if people want to engage with the police. I definitely think what we're doing right now is wrong for immigration. I understand that it benefits us economically for us to be welcoming and for us to be supportive of the people who come here. This year I'm looking at legislation to create a State Department that is responsible for encouraging and being supportive to the people who are coming here, either refugees or immigrants. And I'm also looking at legislation that would, in a sense, recognize all the licenses and education that immigrants come to our state with. If they're trained in their countries and they have degrees and abilities to perform awesome jobs, and they come here and the best they can get is customer service jobs. So if we could do a little bit more to recognize the education they've already received.
Question?
Thank you. So I'm first, second generation American. So my dad is an immigrant from Palestine. He came on a student visa in the 1970s. And my mom is born in Chicago, also to immigrant parents. So my grandmother came as a green card holder from Germany, and then my grandfather came on a work visa from Mexico. And I think what this demonstrates in the different pathways that my family from different continents and different countries were able to come to America is it demonstrates an immigration system that reflects values, that allows people to look to our country for freedom, look to our country for opportunity. Every single one of these places that my family members came from left their home countries because if you look at the time periods in which they left, that opportunity to better yourself through hard work and determination just simply didn't exist. And so when we think about where our immigration national conversation is today, we very much so, and more particularly the conservatives in this country have very much so turned their back on this promise that as you come in to New York City on the Statue of Liberty, was give me your poor, your hungry, your most vulnerable, and we will receive them and we will welcome them. That's the American promise. And so ultimately, what I would continue to do and what I would like to see from lawmakers, I'm a co-sponsor on the bill to provide undocumented immigrants driver's license. Like, we need at a state and local level to reduce the barriers that immigrants face in our community to become full members and productive members of our communities. So I'm committed to continuing to support legislation such as that. But I think we can take it a step further, and we can introduce resolutions that really outline for Congress, because this is one of the powers that we have as state representatives and as state senators, and what structural reforms should exist within comprehensive immigration reform. Because if you compare my grandmother's journey being a European immigrant to my father's family members being Arab Americans, the time frame in which they were able to come to the country vastly different. In one instance, it was just a few years. In another instance, for my dad's brothers and sisters, it was over a decade they had to wait. That's structural. The intent may or may not be racism, but it structurally results in this country is more favorable than that country. And just given our American values, where we believe everyone should be equal and judged on their character and not their nationality and not their race, we need to reform that, and we need to make sure our immigration system reflects these values.
Thank you so much. So something that was very common throughout all three answers was that immigration was a bit of a polarizing issue. So that kind of leads on to this question to how will you work with the opposite party to find solutions? If elected, how would you foster bipartisanship?
So oftentimes people make judgments and assessments based on how we look, based on where we come from, and oftentimes if we have an accent, people prejudge us. It's when you are in a space like we are at the Arizona State Capitol, where I suddenly become a person with basic values, with empathy, love, and caring, where you start to build some level of friendship and relationships. I know this to be true because last year in 2017, there was a bill related to sanctuary cities. And I heard that bill in a committee called Federalism. And prior to that, you have to know and understand that I was always very open about my former immigration status. I didn't hide it. I spoke about it, but no one ever reported on it. And so here I was in committee, hearing things like illegal alien, those people, criminals. And I spoke up and I said, I, as a former undocumented person, disagree with the language. And I think it took the wind out of my members in the committee, and in fact, the sponsor of the bill, Representative Lawrence. But because I had built some level of friendship with another colleague, a Republican, he helped to make sure that that bill, once it went to the floor, did not get a hearing. I think it was that bill. I'm getting them all confused. But my point is, it's about developing those relationships. I will be honest and authentic with you. It is incredibly hard, though, when currently right now at the Arizona State House, the numbers are off. There's only 25 Democrats and there's 35 Republicans. So as you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. They have all the power, and we can work really hard to build those relationships. But until we actually start getting more Democrats to represent, if the numbers were closer to 28-32, we would have a much better chance of working alongside Republicans, although challenging. But I also want to leave you with this. You know, oftentimes we hear about a blue wave. A blue wave will mean nothing if we have Democrats that cross to the other side and forego the values of fighting for our people and their constituents. So I could sit here and tell you that I can build relationships with my colleagues identified as Republicans, but sometimes it's people within our own party that hurt the cause and hurt our movement to actually move forward. So that's why having you here and being present and listening to us and getting to hear what is important to us and what our values are is us expressing it, but then more importantly, we need you to keep us accountable. And so I could say, yes, I can do this, I can do X, Y, Z, but you need to keep us accountable.
The bipartisanship, right? So, I mean, I guess I would really want to make sure that we have a shared definition of what we mean when we're talking about bipartisanship. I mean, we're definitely not asking politicians to compromise their values in order to get something passed. And it doesn't, I definitely will take other people's opinions in crafting legislation. So I'm open to that, but really in the legislative process, what bipartisanship means is that someone introduces a bill that has the co-sponsorship of multiple people from different parties, right? And so I definitely make it a point, when I'm introducing legislation, to walk around and ask for meetings with the Republicans and sit down with them and explain my bills and I tell them where I'm coming from, what I'm trying to accomplish. And I'm open to all their opinions as long as they're productive, as long as they're not trying to undermine what I'm trying to do. Then that would be a bipartisanship bill, right? In my 6 years that I've been in office, I've introduced hundreds of bills. I've only ever gotten 2 bills into a committee, and they were never able to get all the way through the process based on like technicalities. And so I think what really needs to change is the fact that we're not really practicing deliberation in government, in democracy, and I mean at any kind of level. It's just the majority party has total control over the entire agenda, and that's pretty much the opposite of what democracy is. You would think democracy means that when we're gathering together to decide something, that no one's opinion among us is no more valid just because they're smarter, or because they have more money, or because no one is just ultimately right. Like, we should be discussing things, and when we don't discuss things. In the 6 years that I've been in office, every year we average about 1,000 bills a year, and there's only ever been 2 or 3 Democrat bills that make it through the whole process. So we really have to fix how we're not really protecting or allowing for deliberation to happen. And so, I mean, I definitely have examples and models of how we can be doing things differently. The state of Colorado has ran initiatives that require deliberation on bills. And so I'm definitely in support of fostering more of a discussion. But I mean, the reality is right now that Republicans are in control, and they'll put together committees. Our education committee in the Senate has 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So their ideas, they only talk about their ideas, and their ideas automatically always pass. So I mean, if you want bipartisanship, we have to create the structure for bipartisanship. It doesn't just happen on its own.
And to piggyback on that last point that you made, in the House, I believe there's 2 Democrats on the Education Committee and like 9 Republicans. And the justification for it is because the Republicans deemed that 2 of those Republicans were moderate. They just unilaterally decided that that's Democrat enough. And the thing that's frustrating is you wouldn't know it based on the committee assignments, but Democrats comprise of 40% of the state legislature. And on the Democratic side, majority of our members are female, are women. And so again, whether the intent is to actually structurally discriminate, or whether the intent is discrimination, structurally what results in how the Republicans have built our committees is sexism. Because if you're a Republican member of the House or the Senate, by virtue of having that party designation in front of your name, they've decided that you get 3 committee assignments, which means that Democrats on every single committee do not have a majority or do not have enough members to really stop the legislation, or can unilaterally pass legislation. Like, it's very difficult. If you're a Democrat, you only get assigned 2 committees. So if majority of Democrats are female and the women are only getting 2 committees, then what happens to the female voice of the legislature? It's diluted. It's less present, as if it was actually equal between Republican and Democrat. So that structural issue is very important. One of the things that I'll tell you is, I had a private conversation with one of my colleagues And he was saying that he really hopes that the Senate does get a Democratic majority next session, because in that environment, it will force bipartisanship. If the House remains Republican majority and they pass anything too extreme, the Senate can kill it, can not give the bill a hearing, not let the bill move forward, and vice versa for the Senate in relation to the House. And the things this gentleman wants to work on are things like criminal justice reform. I talked to another Republican who says, I wouldn't say it publicly, but I really don't understand why we don't legalize weed and tax the heck out of it and fund education. Right? So the sentiments, there's, in terms of values that guide conservatism and guide progressive, sometimes there's overlap in policy. It might be different in terms of how each individual comes to that conclusion, but if we don't see a check on that system, it's going to be incredibly difficult to try and get progressive things done. It'll continue to be the super extreme ideas from conservatism that make it all the way through.
Thank you for your responses, and we also want to remind the audience that they have the opportunity to speak. If anybody wants to ask a question, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, and we'll allow you guys to ask your question.
All right, so what opinion do you hold that most highly contrasts with the party you closest identify with, and why do you hold that opinion?
I would like to point out that it's a little bit more interesting that sometimes I find myself agreeing with the other party. That's definitely surprised me a lot. And I've definitely voted on some bills that have surprised the Democrats. But I guess, to put it really bluntly, the thing that I think, in my experience, what differentiates me between my party is a lot of times I've heard them voice to me that they view what they're doing as tough love. And they don't understand that they have this sink or swim approach to your success, where if you're doing well, they're tripping over themselves to give you a tax cut so that you could do even better. But as soon as you fall behind, they blame it on you, like if it's your fault. And that's totally opposite of where I'm coming from. I think, from my personal story and from the work I've done in nonprofits, I know that no one is successful unless they have a lot of people that want them to be successful. And I benefited from a government that wanted me to be successful. I was able to transition out of poverty because there was a lot of programs, a lot of investment into my family. And that my family, has done well. I was able to graduate from ASU, and I'm in office now. But it's not even a whole generation behind. And this attitude of this radical individualism is made it to where people from my background can't do what I did. The cost of education is ridiculously out of control. We have childcare waiting lists that hardly ever move. Food stamps don't cover as much as they used to. We're just, I guess, neglecting the fact that all of our success is dependent on all of us being successful. And I think that's my biggest difference that I've seen in my colleagues.
Do you want to clarify colleagues on the Democratic side?
On the Republican side, yeah.
Was your question, how do I differ from my Democratic colleagues?
Yes.
Oh, whoa, I'm sorry, dude.
Well, yeah. You can have it again,
Yeah.
It's cool.
Now you understand vastly difference between conservatives and progressives. So we're in an interesting time right now in our state. When you look at when I was an ASU student, I started in 2007. So a little over 10 years ago, I walked across the graduation stage in 2011. Looking at the students in the audience, there's not even 10 years removed for us in age. And one of the things that, when we lost a Democratic governor and we got a Republican governor with a Republican majority in both chambers, what I saw as a university student was my tuition, or the tuition for an incoming freshman, go from $4,700 for the entire year to over $10,000 when I was walking across that graduation stage. And part of the way that this was accomplished and that the Republicans did this, was they were giving massive tax giveaways to corporations and the wealthiest Arizonans. And the proof is in the numbers. Like if you looked at that time period, I think in 2009, 2010, I was reading articles in the Arizona Republic because I was a student who was very active in trying to convince this conservative legislature that this was a bad move and bad investment into our communities, and they should be prioritizing, especially public education, including the universities. And so when you look at that number, the money that they cut from education and healthcare was the same lump sum that they gave to corporations and the wealthy. So it's not that the money wasn't there. It's not like that we didn't have the revenue so that you guys aren't paying over $10,000 to attend an in-state school. These were choices that were made. And because they made this choice year after year after year, to where, in 2016, when I got elected and I became, in 2017, a member of the body, right? There are some differences both in the Republican caucus now and in the Democratic caucus about whether or not it's good policy to keep giving away corporate handouts, keep giving away welfare to business entities who really don't need the government's help. And there's a lot of tension. I have found that sometimes I see colleagues supporting that, and sometimes I see, myself with some of the furthest right Republicans opposing these tax credits for the corporations or tax cuts. So, once you get into the nuance, there's a lot of rich debate, but at the very least, being a member of the Democratic caucus, what I have found on the House side is every single Democrat is committed to having these difficult conversations and figuring out where as individuals can we break off and vote our conscience, and where as a caucus can we unite our power to really get the most for our communities and our constituencies. And our constituencies are always going to be the most vulnerable, protecting public education, protecting immigrants, women's rights, LGBTQ, people of color. So I would say that would be one example where not everyone is on the same page. Great question.
I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
All right, so what opinion do you hold that most highly contrasts with the party you closest identify with, and why do you hold that opinion?
So I want to start by saying it's really interesting, right, when we talk about parties, Republican, Democrat, what gets lost in translation is that people, like you guys in the audience, have some basic human values that are oftentimes overlooked. It doesn't matter if you in the audience identify as Republican, Independent, Democrat, Green Party, Libertarian, you have some basic value, and that value is that you want to make sure when you graduate from high school, college, that you're going to have a job that pays you well, that you're going to have access to health care, that you're going to potentially save money to retire and do well in retirement, and also have access to something like vacation time and sick time and maternity leave and family leave. That is what all people, regardless of their party affiliation, desires for themselves. The reason I bring this up is because I have a lot of friends that identify as Republican. Oftentimes, I fear in my heart they are unclear about what the Republican Party represents when we talk about the political structure. And I bring this up because I could say, and I could give examples of where we contrast, where we're similar, but I want to talk about how important it is for you all in the audience to challenge the people that you know that may identify as something else, because when we start making those connections and start actually saying we all have the same dream for ourselves and our children, that's where we can actually start moving forward. And what the Republican Party has done really well, and it's interesting because Senator Jeff Flake talked about tribalism, right? They created tribalism through their party politics. And what most people fail to recognize is that right now the Republican Party, they're fighting for one group, corporations. So I just wanted to paint the picture, because there's a lot of my colleagues that identify as Republican that are good people and are understanding, and they want the same things for their kids. But unfortunately, because as I mentioned earlier, absolute power corrupts absolutely, when their arms are being twisted by the power machine called Governor Ducey, the Koch brothers, corporations, they're no longer able to vote in a way that is comfortable. So I don't know if I answered your question, and I apologize, but I think it's really important that we start really identifying who we are as individuals and what we want for ourselves and for our community, because if we are all doing well, if we all feel that we're moving forward, because it is people that drive the economy, not corporations. It is people. Thank you.
Well, I want to apologize, man. That was a really good question, really novel. I've never actually heard that question before, and I guess it kind of threw us all off. There are very few things that I would say that differ between me and the majority of my Democratic colleagues. But I can speak for my experience. The three of us share a lot of passion for what we're doing, and I would say that's lacking from a lot of people. It is just bringing our stories to the table when we're voting for things and advocating for things, putting ourselves into our work. Is definitely one of the big things I would see. But in practical, I would say, especially for all three of us again, is money. We're one of the only states, I think there's two, that offer for your politicians to not have to privatize their campaigns to run for office. And every year there are less and less Democrats choosing this option to run as a publicly funded campaign. And so this means that the state says, goes to politicians and say, if you promise not to raise any money from businesses, PACs, or these weird entities, and if you can find 200 people who live in your district to give you $5 each, the state matches those people's small donations, and the state gives us we're up to $40,000 to run our campaigns. It's not enough for everybody to use, but we work together and we make our dollars stretch. But I believe it makes us different kinds of politicians. When we're down at the Capitol voting on legislation, you don't ever have to worry about us if we're not hurting to decide, if I vote for this, am I going to be able to raise money because of this vote or not? It's much more, am I going to be able to come back and talk to my voters and explain what I'm doing and ask for their vote again? I think it makes for a totally different kind of politician, and we're some of the few that participate in this program.
So thank you so much for your perspectives on that question. That was a very good question. And we really align with that as well. As One Resistance, we love thinking about politics at a human level as well. So that was very inspirational to hear. And kind of to lead on to the next question, it would be, what is your strongest held belief, and how does that affect your political decision making? To all three of you, anyone can answer first.
Okay, so my strongest held belief. I'm going to have to say I'm going to start in progressivism. I wouldn't just call myself a liberal or just a Democrat, but I think I've already kind of talked about my biggest belief is that whatever you want to consider your individual success is totally dependent on public investment. However you want to think about it, not just to get practical in terms of roads, but everything from education to the healthcare system. We rely on a system that because we take care of each other. We have interest in it and everybody. And I like to think I use that to guide myself in terms of, that I'm not going to be successful unless a lot of other people are successful. And so I'm looking to make sure that, that we take care of everybody, that everybody progresses forward. you know, the most of us at the most they can. So.
That's a really great question. Strongest held belief. So, oftentimes when we are considering policy, what I enjoy about debating on the floor is I personally talk about the impact to people on policy. One of the things that I have begun to acknowledge and recognize is oftentimes when policy is debated on the floor, whether it's the Senate floor, the House floor, whether it's at the state capitol or at the federal level, there's a reason politicians, and by the way, I am not a politician, I am a public servant, identify as a politician, but a public servant first and foremost, is language. Really difficult language is oftentimes used when debating policy, and there's a reason for that, because that is how people in power hold on to power. They want to make things sound so incredibly complex that we tune out, and we've been tuning out for a very long time. And so my strongest held belief in terms of what I can do is fight and provide a perspective, which is a human perspective, the impact to people that policy has, how our decision making impacts us and what we do every single day. And I hate to say this, but you guys sitting in the audience may not know that often when policy is discussed, the people that are mostly impacted by the policy, their voices are always left off the table. And when policy is created, the policy is created in such a way that it's a very shortened time frame, and it's the people who are going to benefit. So my strongest belief is to always be inclusive of the most vulnerable populations, to find a way to have those voices heard, and how they're impacted by our decision making, to be thoughtful about legislation, and to start actually seeing policy and how it impacts us all in our communities. I know it's not a great answer, but it's an answer that just comes from my heart. I'm really tired of treating people disrespectfully. In fact, we treat corporations with more respect than we do a newborn child, to a mom who might be a single parent, who might need food assistance, who might need child care. And it requires a small. So for me, my strongest held belief is to look at you authentically in the eye and tell you that every day I believe in you and our humanity and us moving together.
I love that question. Thank you. So I would say my deepest held belief is compassion, and that's embedded in the value system of being a progressive. And it guides all my decisions. It guides the bills I sponsor and co-sponsor. It guides the votes I take in committee and take on the floor. It guides how I interact with constituents and visitors at the Capitol. You know, like last session, there was a group of individuals who all happened to need wheelchairs who came to the Capitol. And I immediately, when they reached out, made sure that I had scheduled a meeting with them, make sure that I had gone out and, you know, talked to this group, because their experience was so vastly different than anything I had experienced. And I was embarrassed because, I mean, it's just very apparent when that group came, like the building was not designed for these individuals to fully interact and to fully integrate within it. You know, I had to push around my sofa in my office. I had to push or take out chairs in my office because my office was so small. My desk was clunky, and I saw firsthand, like, could you imagine what that would feel like to have that experience not only in your day-to-day life, but have that experience in the most powerful place in our state, the Capitol? And it literally broke my heart to see this community. I mean, first of all, you know, when I went out to speak with them, and there's an article following this up, like, there weren't any other members out there. Very seldom had chosen to engage with this group, which I thought was devastating. But then, you know, several days, if not weeks later, then we deliberate on legislation that has a vast impact on people who have disabilities. And the community, even though it was chipping away at their rights, they had come to the table with conservatives in the legislature because they had the majority of the votes, negotiated a deal, thought everything was good, everything was done. And at the last minute on the House floor, the Republicans offered an amendment that they did not run by this community, and the community was completely shut out. And my emails were blowing up, and people were saying, you know, I was getting phone calls like, this is unjust, this is not fair. Like, we came to the table in good faith. Why is that not being returned? And it just, I mean, it broke my heart. And this happens time and time again to several groups who either engage or don't engage. And so we need to bring more compassion to government because even just the interaction can transform someone's lives. If they have a positive interaction with an elected official, someone who represents them, then they're more likely to continue that civic engagement and be a part of the process. If they have a negative reaction, they can do one of two things. They can either get super fired up and try to fight the man, you know, and channel that rage into making a difference and making sure it doesn't happen again. But what I fear is a lot of people then disengage and think that they don't matter. And to me, nobody should feel like that in the state of Arizona. Every individual is precious. Every individual has worth, and we can reflect that not only in our interactions, but again with the policies that we introduce. And that's ultimately how I make decisions at the state capitol.
Thank you so much for your responses. So a follow-up question a little bit towards this is, we often as students and as community members forget that politicians are also community members. So what are kind of the attributes that you would look for in a political leader?
I'll go first on this one. So attributes on a political leader? So I think everyone's a politician. I think everyone practices politics, whether or not you're in government, right? Like, if you think about, like, you know, when I was at ASU, and one of my majors while I was going to college, one of my degrees is in economics, which, you know, for me was an incredibly difficult major. There was a lot of math, a lot of critical thinking through that lens. And so I was constantly having to build consensus, build relationships with students in my class so that we could figure out what the homework meant, so we could study and build study sheets together. You know, and everyone, we had to learn how to delegate, okay, who's gonna be responsible for what topic area? You know, because there's so much workload, like you're balancing 15, 18 credit hours, like, you know, to the point that Senator Mendez made earlier, we like to think that we can do all this on our own, but the reality is in a community and a society, we really have to rely on one another if we want every single one of us to succeed. So I think that ability to delegate, I think that ability to build consensus, you know, to bring coalitions to the table. So this kind of work translates into the clubs that you guys are a part of. You know, I've seen people who are in clubs that are social groups and can have a really good knack for just bringing the social life together. I was never one of those people, but I appreciated when that friend could call and 20 people would show up. There's the people who can make sure that 20 people show up to a protest. I was definitely that person in college because of everything that was happening. So, like, understand that you don't need a title to be a leader. In your day-to-day life, you are leading. And it's in your personal life, it's in your professional life, it's in your school life. And I think acknowledging those attributes and acknowledging that you have strengths already, and you don't need to change to try to be some other aspirational leader, like that is a critical step in having the confidence then to continue to step up and take on more leadership. You know, that's kind of how I feel like I was able to be successful starting as a college student, and now as you know, the youngest woman in the state legislature, getting elected at 26. Like that is just a culmination of understanding that these experiences are leadership. So I would say I look for people who are already demonstrating those skills and qualities, and bringing them forward so that they continue to grow and flourish.
Go ahead,
So I really like how Representative Salman started with the idea that, you know, we are all our politicians, and you know, we all. So what I'm looking for in a politician or a political leader is the same thing that I would like, you know, expect from anybody else, kind of thing. But really, I say that too because I believe that anybody could be a politician. Everybody here, you don't have to be some kind of like, you know, you're not born into this. You don't have to have some kind of like special pedigree and have all these kinds of like degrees and anything like that. I think a lot of it is just concern for other people and wanting to serve and wanting, you know, to help bring people into the process. You know, but at the same time, I mean, there are definitely things that I think do not make it helpful for people if they're trying to be political leaders. And so I'm looking for people who, you know, can deal with insecurities, or that don't have a lot of insecurities. People who, you know, can. I think I wish more politicians knew how to be vulnerable, knew how to, you know, even to the simplest thing of being able to say they don't know what is going on at the moment. They give us so many bills to vote on with so little time. You know, there's just the ability to say, you know, like, I don't know what's going on, and I'm going to go ask questions. I think is a big skill that you know, skill that I'm looking for in politicians. But with that, I want to tell you, you know, like one of my observations that I learned from studying political science here at ASU is there is no like rules or expectations for politicians. It is really weird, right? I mean, like doctors, like we can think of all different kinds of professions. Doctors have the Hippocratic Oath. You know, lawyers have to pass the bar. There's all kinds of things that we expect out of a lot of professions, except politicians. It's not really written down about how to go about being a politician. And so, I mean, the things that I hate the most are when politicians try to talk to you like if they are just an agent of one specific kind of community. And you know, they have to consistently vote because, you know, they believe that the agriculture community got them elected to office, and so they're just there to do what the agriculture committee wants them to do. I don't think that's being very creative at all with your responsibilities. And the other way is where people get elected to office and they think that you elected them because of who they are, like their personality, and that they're just there until, you know, you don't like them anymore and you just vote them out. And so they're just going to do whatever they feel is right in there to them, you know, however they do math, kind of thing. So I'm really trying to build this expectation out of politicians that our job is to be there to represent people who are not being represented when we're making a decision. You know, if we're coming together to decide, you know, how to make healthcare work, you know, are we taking into account how this is going to affect all the people who are not at the table? And so I would really think that's the kind of thing, the very least you should expect from your politician is that they're deliberating. They're going out of the way to ask questions and find out what the policy is going to actually do. But again, you should not take that for granted. I mean, the average politician is not doing that. It's either they think they're an agent of the community, or they're just doing whatever they think is right.
So I moved to 44th Street in Southern when I was almost 14 years of age. 44th Street in Southern in Phoenix, which is not too far from here. I've lived in this community all my life. I'm 46. I am so proud to actually represent the community where I grew up. I graduated from Tempe High School, which is right there on Mill and Broadway. I also came to Arizona State University. I can describe the many changes that this community has overseen and how much it has transformed in the last close to 30 years. I point that out because so often we have amazing bright minds like you guys that are in fact leaders, as Representative Salman mentioned, and you have this amazing ability to, at one point, go back into the communities where you grew up and be the change that is so necessary. I also bring that up because right now we have a huge problem in Arizona politics. When you look at the politicians, especially Republicans, although it is true on the Democratic side, we have a lot of people that are not native to Arizona, and I'm not a native to Arizona, but I moved to Arizona when I was 10. I say that's close enough. And I've lived in this community since the age of 13, 14. My kids went through the Tempe elementary school system. My kids also graduated from Tempe High School, are also attending Arizona State University, continue to live in Tempe. But going back to the problem that I identify, we have a lot of Republicans that moved to our state after they've retired. Senator Kavanaugh, who is a law enforcement officer somewhere in New York, moved to Arizona after he retired. He's one of the many people who receives a large pension, benefited from probably all the amazing democratic laws that passed in New York State, became wealthy, came to our state, has nothing to do because unfortunately we failed to actually compensate people. There's a reason we don't have diversity in our state ledge, diversity in thinking, in jobs. Most of the people are self-employed or in this case retired with nothing to do but slowly destroy our state with policies that tend to be incredibly racist, with policies that punish our most vulnerable children, our poor families. Because you see, when you are from a different place, and especially a different state, and you decide to retire to Arizona because we have sunshine most of the year, because we have the lowest property tax, the lowest taxes, but yet we continue to elect people like the Kavanaughs, like the Leaches, like the Thorpes, like the Finchams, who've all retired and have benefited, like Representative Fincham, who retired from Michigan, which was known as a very democratic state. In fact, they were one of the first states to actually come together and get auto workers pensions, vacation time, medical plans, etc. They benefited from democratic policies in those states to come to our state, not knowing and understanding our indigenous people, our tribal lands, to a state that is predominantly Latino, people of color, and it scares the hell out of them. And so now what they do is they create policies that bring more of them to our state. Retired folks, people that have no commitments to our education system, people that have no commitments to us and you, our future, and your retirement. So when we talk about attributes of political leaders and community and why that's so important is because we have to know and understand the people who we are electing, where they come from, and are they really going to fight for us, the people who've decided and who were born here, who are from here. And if you're an ASU student and you decide to stay and you want to become a political leader, get to know your community. Get to know and understand the state's history and its past. And I share this with my Republican colleagues that are actually native to the state of Arizona, and they agree that their colleagues that decided to move into our state with their fat pension checks and decided to run for public office because the people electing them are just as biased as them, benefiting from our low tax base, We have to start fighting for our state, and that is why you guys, every single one of you, is so important, especially if you grew up in the state. Because the reason we've had racist, biased policies is because of those who've come to our state and suddenly didn't like the hue of our peoples.
Thank you so much for all of your perspectives. So it's very enlightening to hear everything. I want to open up to the floor again to see if anybody else have any other questions. Oh, and also one more thing. Due to time constraint, if it's possible to keep the answers to 1 to 2 minutes long. Thank you.
So I know we currently kind of, as an electorate, have blinders on right now, really focusing on the election that's coming up in 34 days. However, speaking from the perspective of state representatives, what do you think that people in our age demographic, as college students, as young adults who are coming into the world and who are passionate about certain issues, what can we do to be able to have you understand what our passions are, and how are we best able to change state legislature laws and make our state more reflective of what our values are?
So come and talk to me. I will hand you my business cards. I Instagram Isela, Isela Blanc, Blanc. Message me. I respond. I am accessible and available, and my door is always open. And I listen.
So through my own experience, so you're wanting to engage with elected officials. So what I did, and I felt like I did it in college out of necessity. You know, I'm one of 3, I'm the middle child. At the time when the Republicans were cutting funding to higher education, all 3 of us were in college. And I just couldn't see how a working class family could afford, with children who are first generation college students, could afford the rising cost of college. And I didn't think that was fair for future generations, your generation, the generation of all after you, to have to bear the brunt of these poor decisions. And so immediately, because it kind of happened, like when I was at the university, I was a part of the community service sorority. I was planning on running for sorority president, like that was my trajectory, and then doing my school and education. And when that had happened so quickly, it put me on the course to where I am today, where the first thing I did was I got a ton of students that I had built relationships with through my sorority and through my classes to come down by the buses to protest the state legislators. And even though sometimes it sounds like or feels like when we protest it doesn't make a difference, the budget cuts that year that they were originally proposing were $240 million. And because of our protests and because of our lobbying efforts, we got it reduced by $100 million. So they cut significantly less funding. So that's the kind of power that you already have. And if anyone tries to convince you otherwise, it's because they're scared of your voice and they're scared of your influence. I would say the other recommendations I have, because I know I'm running out of time, is learn how to meet one-on-one with elected officials. I did a lot of that in college. Learn how to research policies that you're interested in. You can connect with the group that already has professional staff, and you can do internships. I've done policy fellowships while I was in college. I did organizing internships while I was in college, so I can get better acclimated with our state representatives and senators. But all of those opportunities already exist for you all. You just have to start reaching out to your fellow students, reach out to the 3 of us. We know amazing organizations that would love to work with college students. Reach out to your professors. Just keep asking these questions, because that's how I learned about opportunities and ways that I could be civically engaged while I was a college student not too long ago.
So I mean, I agree with both of their answers. I mean, like, reach out to me for sure. But at the same time, I want to add the idea of practicing your story and really getting to know your story. We're all big, believers in this guy named Marshall Gaines, who spells out like how to tell your story and include it in everything you're doing. If you're not arguing or leading with a story, most people are not listening, especially politicians. I mean, nobody's moved by facts and figures, and politicians are only using them when it's in their favor. So if you want to talk to people in power, you're going to have to bring a story to them. And the other thing is, I mean, like, you guys already have this group, so I mean, either work with this group or make your own group that's issue oriented to what you're doing. But you're going to have to bring it to the legislature, and you have to take yourself seriously. I mean, you have to recognize your worthiness and the fact that you have a right to be there. But I mean, you're going to be up against a lot. I mean, well, we're going to be open to whatever you want to do, right? I mean, if there's a bill that you want to run, you can definitely come to us, and we'll talk about how we can introduce a bill. But a lot of people are not going to want to talk to you unless you're from their district, and you're just going to have to like not take that for an answer. A lot of these people have power beyond just representing their little area. Some of these people are chair committees, right? Like they're the gatekeeper for all the education bills. So you have a right to talk to them about the fact that they have that much power over that, and present their case. But you also have to bring something for them to do. It can't just be like nailing a complaint to their door. You have to find a way that holds them accountable. So make sure you have an ask of them. Otherwise, they're just gonna like pat you on the back, or or walk you out the door. And you would not believe how many people I've watched other politicians who will like ignore what you're saying and get you to talk about something else. And just buddy you to where you didn't even realize they changed the subject. So you just have to be prepared for that kind of stuff.
So thank you for the shout out. Basically, yeah, so as you said, One Resistance, we do advocate for these things. And we were wondering, as politicians, how, since we do advocate for many political ideologies, and since we're nonpartisan, in our space we really attempt to do this. How are you creating spaces to talk to students with different political leanings?
That's a really great question. So this spring we had youth from March for Our Lives who I had the privilege of working with. And I think the March for Our Lives youth represented a vast diversity in socioeconomics, party affiliation, if we can call it that. And so one of the things that I was able to do, and it's something that I think many people in our positions fail to acknowledge and recognize, and that is the power of your voices, the power of your ability to move things. And so these youth, because of my relationship with them, I was like their insider, guiding them on messaging, but they were leading on everything. I helped organize a lot of meetings with our leadership, both on the Senate and the House side, but then they were also helping me, because you see, you might recall early on I mentioned that your job is to keep us accountable. And oftentimes we might have people that identify as Democrat, and you would assume and believe that they have the same values as a quote-unquote progressive Democrat. But you see, things get a little sticky in politics. Because unfortunately, when you're at the state capitol, our values tend to be foregone when it becomes about me and my self-interest and how I'm going to move forward in a different way. Maybe I want to run for governor one day. Maybe I want to run for Congress. And so then, unfortunately, our core values end up not being as core, because it is no longer always about the people that we represent, but about us and our egos. So, having March for Our Lives work with me, and me being able to leverage their ability to engage media, engage youth, was really powerful. So it is really important to know and understand that if you find someone like a Representative Salman, a Representative or Senator Mendez, we can leverage your voices. But more importantly, you leverage our ability to be better representatives for you. I hope I answered it.
So, I mean, if you got different political, ideologies or different leanings than me, I'm still have an open door policy kind of thing. Like if you want to talk to me, and you don't have to just be my representative. If you want to talk to a senator, right? I'm one of 30 senators. It would be ridiculous if I just talked to only the people in my district. I mean, that just doesn't represent like the power dynamics of like how much influence we each individually have. And I also recognize that I don't just represent the people who voted for me. Like that would be a total disservice to everybody else who voted. And so, I mean, with that being said, like just because I label myself as a progressive Democrat doesn't mean I don't have like an open mind. I said earlier, I'm surprised that I sometimes agree with Republicans. So I mean, if you have an idea, you definitely just give it an honest pitch. But I want to say.